Hello everybody, it's Sarah, and today I have my April wrap-up for you. And by the way, I managed to only read 15 books in April, which I'm kind of proud of, because if you have watched my April TBR, you will know that it was one of my goals to not read 20 plus books this month, which I managed. I managed to not stress myself out too much with how many books I want to read, and I'm kind of proud of myself. But also because I know I used to be one of those people who read like 2 books a month and was like, what the fuck, how can these people read this many books? To all of you out there watching, I just want to say it doesn't matter how many books you read. If you even just start a book and don't finish it in a month, that's still absolutely fine. If you're in a reading slump and don't read any books at all, that's still absolutely fine. I just happen to have turned into an absolute reading monster and I don't know how to stop anymore, even if I sometimes kinda would like to stop. But yeah, now let's get into the books that I actually read. I already uploaded a middle of the month recent reads check-in wrap up, and in that book I talked about these in that video I talked about these 5 books. First, Dr. Faustus by, what's his name, Johann Georg Geiselbrecht. I talked about Die Stadt der träumenden Bücher by Walter Moers. I talked about The Wrath and the Dawn and The Rose and the Dagger by Renée Ahdieh. And I talked about Memory of Souls by Chen Lyons. So if you want to know my thoughts on these books, go and watch that video. It will be linked down below and up there. And now let's get into the books I read in the second half of April, as always starting with rereads. And I only had one of those in April, which was Blood of Olympus, which is the 5th and last book in the Heroes of Olympus series by Rick Riordan. With this I finished my reread of the Heroes of Olympus series. And gotta be honest, I had pretty much the same opinion I think when I first read this, but I think I'm just not a fan of this finale, mostly because, you know, Percy and Annabeth are 2 of my favorite characters and they just didn't have a very big role to play in this one, mostly because contrary to the Percy Jackson and the Olympian series, which is first perspective just following Percy, we have a much bigger cast of main characters in this series, one of whom who gets a way too big role in my opinion is Jason Grace, and Jason Grace is the most boring character in any book I have ever talked about. He's like a bland piece of white bread. And I don't even like comparing him to white bread because there's a lot of good white bread out there, like, you know, baguette or focaccia. Like, there's a lot of amazing white breads out there. Jason Grace is not that type of white bread. So yeah, he's just boring as fuck, and he's the main reason why I just don't enjoy this series as much as the original Percy Jackson series. Then moving on to a book I don't have here physically, which is L'Étranger by Albert Camus, which I read in French because since I started taking French lessons again, as I have said multiple times already, my dad decided to make me read more French books, and this was the first one he gave me because he thought it's a good idea to give me a book in French where I have to decipher the language itself and then also decipher the meaning behind the book, because it's a very philosophical literary work and it's like part of the, like, you know, kind of part. Albert Camus didn't see himself to be a part of this kind of philosophical school, which is existentialism, but, you know, a lot of people count L'Étranger to be part of existentialism. Anyway, that's on philosophical history, which I know nothing about, but yeah, didn't understand a lot of this book. Can't say if I enjoyed it or not because I didn't understand enough of the book. I just know it's about this kind of person who's just not emotional whatsoever, who then kills someone and, you know, has to go to court for it. That's all I got from it. So yeah, that was L'Étranger. Staying with the classics, I finally read 1984 by George Orwell, which I picked from a physical TBR jar, and I didn't like it. I didn't like it whatsoever. There's classics where I feel like they're still really worth reading and I can still see the merit of them, But this one, I can understand why it was such a big deal when it was published, but I feel like its days are completely gone. This is 100% a book like that has everything to do with the Cold War, from the anti-communist propaganda to, you know, the fascist state stuff. And yeah, I just really didn't like it. I mean, I also didn't like Animal Farm, so it shouldn't surprise me that I'm not a fan of George Orwell's writing. But as I said, firstly, the anti-communist propaganda, which understandable, but kind of boring. Then the whole security, you know, what's it called? Not observant state. You know what I mean. Like, you know, constantly being under surveillance state. That's it. Surveillance state storyline. I think there's a lot more authors who have written way better stories with that storyline, with the kind of, you know, dystopian, utopian kind of surveillance state storyline. And then also I wasn't a fan of the sexism in this book. Like literally in the first few chapters that we meet our main character, he fantasizes about raping a woman. And I know that there's a reason within the story why he does that and whatever, but you know, still not a fan. So yeah, don't think this is a classic you necessarily gotta pick up. Unless you're really interested in the Cold War and literature about, not about the Cold War, but you know, influenced by the Cold War. Next, let's very quickly talk about Redemption in Indigo by Karen Lord, because I won't talk about that too much. This is on a not secret TBR of mine that I've talked about in my last TBR video as well. Basically, I'm currently trying to find and read a bunch of international fantasy, international meaning not from North America, UK or Australia, and mostly trying to also find authors from global south countries. And so yeah, this was the first one that arrived. This was the first one that I picked up. This is by an author from Barbados, so from the Caribbean. And yeah, I really enjoyed it. It's very folklore inspired, myth inspired, and we basically follow a woman who left her husband and is then given an item by kind of spirit god things. However, one spirit god thing wants to get that item back because it was his originally. And so yeah, I enjoyed it. I will talk more about it once I do the video on having read all of those books. So yeah, you can look forward to that probably sometime in summer. Another book I'm gonna try and talk about not too long is The Unbroken by C.L. Clarke. This is the first book in the Magic of the Lost series, and this was the pick for April for my book club of Queens, Witches and Valkyries. That book club is all about reading adult high fantasy by women, non-binary folks and genderqueer folks. And yeah, if you want to join us, all the links are in the description box down below, the Twitter, the Discord, everything else. So definitely go and check that out. But yeah, this is colonial fantasy. I would describe this as, we follow Turenne, who is a soldier, and she was taken from her home country to be trained as a soldier by the colonial people who colonized her home country. Does that make sense? I hope it makes sense. Anyway, now she's returning to smack down a rebellion that's starting to rise, and she has to deal with a lot of conflicting feelings. She has to deal with a lot of split loyalties. And yeah, very, very good and interesting book. But I will have a full spoiler-free review for this up next week. I will try to make it next week, actually probably on Wednesday. So I won't talk much more about this book, but just if you enjoy colonial fantasy, definitely pick this up because the dynamics in here were chef's kiss. Then I also read Towers of Midnight by Robert Jordan and Brandon Sanderson. This is the 13th book in the Wheel of Time series, so only one book left in the series. Woohoo! I am so excited to finally finish this, and that's all my thoughts on this. Literally all my thoughts. I read the second book in the Inheritance trilogy by N.K. Jemisin. The second book is called The Broken Kingdom, and I loved it just as much as the first book, maybe a little bit more. I don't know if I liked it more. I like the main character more, but like Nahadoth is my favorite character in this series ever, and we didn't get to see a lot of Nahadoth, so you know, conflicting feelings on my part whether I liked it more or not. But this series is set in a world where there's gods walking among mortals. However, those gods have been enslaved by said mortals. And so yeah, that brings a lot of problems with it. So I can highly recommend picking up this series because the world building is so interesting, the characters are so interesting. I absolutely love this. I already started the third and last book in the trilogy. And yeah, just this should be the series everyone thinks of when anyone says inheritance, not Aragon. This one, definitely this one. Then I also read Firekeepers Daughter by Angeline Booley. This is a YA literary thriller, I would say, kind of. We follow our main character, whose name I forgot, Danis, who is mixed heritage Ojibwe. And she is drafted by the FBI as a confidential informant. Is that what it's called? Because there's some death that happened on reservation. However, Danis decides to start her own investigations, not telling the FBI about it. This was one of the only mood, like purely mood pickups that I had in the past few years. Like literally just going to the bookstore, seeing this absolutely gorgeous cover and being like, ooh, this is pretty, I want this. And yeah, not even caring that it's a genre that I literally never read. I think this is my first YA thriller that I ever read. So yeah, and I am so happy that I did pick this up. I gave this 5 stars. I thought there were so many interesting discussions in here. And you know, there was some tension in general, like, you know, not tension, but suspense, that's what I wanted to say. There was some suspense generally in here, but it was so much more about Danis not coming to terms because she knows who she is in a way, but it was so much more about Danis living her reality and living as who she is. And who she is a Native American woman, and also having to deal, you know, with kind of discrimination from both sides. Because for the one side she is too not white, and for the other side she's too white. So there were a lot of discussions about that, and I will try to see if I find this one like quote in the author's note, which I absolutely love because it perfectly encompasses what this book is. There it is. There's an important distinction between writing about trauma and writing a tragedy. I sought to write about identity, loss and injustice, and also of love, joy, connection, friendship, hope, laughter, and the beauty and strength in my Ojibwe community. It was paramount to share and celebrate what justice and healing looks like in a tribal community. Cultural events, language revitalization, ceremonies, traditional teachings, whisper networks, blanket parties, and numerous other ways tribes have shown resilience in the face of adversity. And this just perfectly encompasses my feelings that I had when finishing this book, because yes, there is like a bleakness to it. Maybe bleakness is not the right word, but you know, there's not really pink glasses set over your eyes. It's talked about how like often there is no justice for Indigenous women. There's talk about drugs within Indigenous communities and so on. But all of that does not mean that there isn't so much beauty in those communities as well. And I think this book just perfectly shows both sides. And just perfectly shows that yes, there are problems that need to be addressed, but like a lot of times not even addressed from within the communities, but you know, just generally stop treating Native people like shit. You know, just common courtesy stuff, which, whatever, let's not get into that right now. But that despite all of that, there's so much beauty within the culture and within the heritage, and I just loved how much of a focus on that there was within the book. And those were the parts that I enjoyed the most about the book, because yeah, there is trauma in this book, there is sad parts in this book, but there's also so much joy. And so yeah, I can definitely highly recommend this. And then the last book I want to talk about now is The Blade Itself by Jo Abercrombie, which is the first book in the first Law series. I buddy read this in April and we both finished it and were like, what the fuck even is going on? We like the characters, we like what we just read, but we have no clue what's going on. So yeah, I'm just gonna try and summarize this for now as grimdark fantasy following a bunch of despicable characters who you somehow still kind of end up rooting for and still end up liking, preparing for a war. That is basically what this book is right now, and all I feel like able to tell you about this, because I still don't 100% know what's going on. But yeah, I really enjoyed this. Jo Abercrombie's writing is absolutely beautiful. Also, I can highly recommend the audiobook because the narrator is so good. And yeah, there were some things where I was like, we could have done without that, but sadly that's just something that is there in fantasy usually. So yeah, I'm gonna talk about that a bit more once I review the series, once I'm done with the series. But yeah, be aware that, you know, there's some stuff in there. Although it's a grimdark fantasy and an entire first book and there was no rape, so I'll count that as a plus. So yeah, and that was it for this video. That was it for all the books I read in April. If you have any thoughts that you'd like to share on any of the books I just talked about, leave them in the comments down below. If you enjoyed this video, maybe think about giving me a thumbs up and also maybe subscribing. All the links to my social media as well as all the links to the book club I mentioned are left in the description box down below as well. And yeah, with all of that said, I hope I'll see you soon. Bye!